Hey everybody, just another mic check for y'all. Check, check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Everybody good? This is a Friday afternoon. We have a press conference scheduled for 11:45 into the case of Faye Swetlik. I'm Tim Scott, not the senator, and life is good. Anyone need me to do any more? I can keep going. We're good, everyone? Cool.
No, it wasn't me, but I'll make sure you see it.
Standing up so you can figure out where to be. Common just give me a level, please.
It's my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, please. I don't know. I think it's probably there's only one.
No, no, I'll let you know that get rid of that little secret.
Thank you. The one you're about to walk in there. Yeah, just talk about that. Yes, yes. You done the night thing?
Yeah, mine before.
What is it? What's the number? Hey, just so you know, him is like 8678, 8678. We can grab a mic and do live as soon as this is over. That's him is like 8678.
Mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I really like how it's just like one lever.
Guys, if I can give everybody's attention very quickly, just informally give you a heads up. Still a couple minutes away from starting. Patients, just helping out here and wanted to, and with that in mind, let you know you're hearing from Sergeant Evan Antley, Cayce Department of Public Safety again, in addition to Lexington County Coroner Margaret Fisher. So for the out-of-towners, Margaret Fisher, common spelling, and if anybody's joined us since yesterday morning, Evan Antley, E-V-A-N-A-N-T-L-E-Y, A-N-T-L-E-Y, on the last name. Be a couple of more minutes. Thank you so much.
I don't know if it's long enough to reach out. I did mean to get another extension for it, but
Hey, Bill.
I was just gonna buy one, you know, they're not too expensive. I think you can probably get another 5-foot one for maybe a $1.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was, I've done it before. I've done it before, but yesterday was sort of, I noticed it was I'm not working this Saturday. No one's working this Saturday. I'm so surprised that you get in.
But then you're also making like a trip hazard for somebody just to rip your camera right off.
They don't always work here.
Yeah, like I can't use those turns on my camera. The light will take it. Yeah, I even got this camera's off. Yeah, so they don't last long.
Well, I only do that. I want a second. Well, I've
Actually, have a camera sitting that I use for, we use for hurricanes, just for notification producer. Those are great. I mean, the one sensors. Oh, the camera. Yeah. I mean, well, no, these little cameras. So many active work in it, but so many. Yeah, I've seen those little, I mean, it's, right. It's great for the even cases. I mean, you just don't want to keep it a lot because you get kind of nervous. If you go far, you can do more big. Yeah. And you can take it in the door. I think
Are we good? Everybody good? Josh, you good? Good morning. My name is Evan Antley, the Sergeant and Public Information Officer with the Cayce Department of Public Safety. I'd like to welcome you here and thank you for your patience. In the beginning, we promised you daily case updates, and that's what we're here to do today. Before we get into this too far, I want everyone to continue to pray for Faye Swetlik. This has been a horrible situation for our community and for our department. We want to thank you for your patience with us as a department. Yesterday was a tough day, possibly the toughest day of many law enforcement careers. Some of you have requested 911 audio from the initial report when Faye went missing. I'm happy to say that we have that for you this morning. They have been redacting personal information over the last few hours, and we will have that out to you within a few short minutes at the end of this press conference. Yesterday, you saw Our investigators and agents led an investigation following City of Cayce municipal sanitation trucks through the neighborhood of Churchill Heights. What we were doing was emptying trash cans and looking to see what came out before it was entered into the truck. As part of that search, we located a critical item of evidence related to our investigation of bringing Faye Swetlik home. Based on that discovery, we narrowed down an area that we felt as an investigative team that we needed to go back to and look for more evidence. Director Snellgrove and leaders were in the area planning another methodical search of that area. Even though we had been there multiple times, we were going back. During the early planning stages of that search, Director Byron Snellgrove with Cayce DPS located the body of Faye Marie Swetlik. What we can tell you is this: based on our investigation and based on the information, the preliminary information that we received from the coroner's office, we believe that Faye had not been in that location for a very long time at all. A short time later, just moments after locating Faye Marie Swetlik, we located a deceased male at 602 Piccadilly Square. What I'd like to do now is allow Lexington County Coroner Margaret Fisher to step up to make ID on that person.
Hey, everybody. First, I want to say thank you. Thank you for covering this case so diligently, and thank you for your patience in allowing my office and all the other law enforcement agencies to handle business and to get the information we need. And you guys have been so patient with waiting on all of our news releases, so we really do appreciate that. I'm here to identify the male that was found on the scene. So I'll spell his name. It's going to be a Caucasian male. He's 30 years old. His first name is Cody, C-O-T-Y. Middle name is Scott, S-C-O-T-T. Last name is Taylor, T-A-Y-L-O-R. He did reside at 602 Piccadilly Square, and as you know, the autopsy for him will probably be on Saturday as well, and we won't know any information on the cause of death until after the autopsy is completed. And at that time, I'm sure we'll do another news release and give you that information. But it's going to be Saturday. Probably by Saturday afternoon, we'll know more about him. Okay? Thank you.
What about the autopsy?
I've got more to give you. So there are a lot of questions out there. What I can tell you is this. The male body that was just identified as Cody Taylor was, our evidence and our investigation does link these two together. I can confirm that he was a neighbor, that he was not a relative, he was not a friend, he was merely a neighbor that lived in Churchill Heights. At this time, I want to assure you, our community, and all of our parents out there that we have no reason to believe that there is an active threat in the Churchill Heights community or the city of Cayce as a whole. We have no suspects at this time. We have made no arrest, and we are not seeking any persons of interest as of this time. Lastly, I want to say this. Again, this has been a tragic situation for our community, for our department, and for everyone who has been following the story of Faye Marie Swetlik. We want to thank the community for their tips. Without them, we may not be where we are. We want to thank that neighborhood. We went in there and turned their lives upside down. We made them late for work. We searched their homes, and we invaded their privacy. But we did it for a reason, and we had a goal. This is not the outcome we wanted, but this is where we are, and our work continues to bring justice for Faye Marie Swetlik. I do have time for questions. There are some things about this investigation that I'm not going to be able to tell you about. But I do have time for questions, and we can take those now. Yes, sir, in the back.
Can you say if they were, where they were both found, and if they were both found inside his residence, and if so, where?
I can answer that for you. So, Faye Marie Swetlik, her body was located in a wooded area between her residence and the Napa Auto Parts where we did our briefings earlier in the week. The body of Cody Taylor was located at his residence. I'm not going to get into specifics, but it was at his residence. Yes, ma'am.
Since there is no pending investigation with further criminal charges, are you able to detail the piece of evidence that you found by going behind the trash truck?
So I want to clarify, we do still have an open investigation. What we are looking at is just what I gave you. But just because we don't have any suspects now, we want to make sure that there's not anyone else involved in the disappearance of Faye Marie Swetlik. So I can tell you it was a critical piece of evidence, and what I will confirm is this. It was a critical piece of evidence that would have been listed on her missing persons flyer. Next question.
Do you believe that Cody killed Faye? I know the investigation is very preliminary, but would you say that?
I can't comment on that ongoing investigation. Again, what I will tell you is they are linked.
Can you tell us where the evidence is found at all?
Yes, in a trash can belonging to 602 Piccadilly Square, which is the residence of Cody Taylor. In the back.
How close is his house to her house?
100 to 150 feet. So in that area, there is Londonderry Square and Piccadilly Square. It's some small, similar to townhomes that are right next to one another, and they're right. I mean, those two lanes are right next to each other. Yes, sir.
Did Cody Taylor have a criminal record or was known to Cayce DPS?
He has no criminal history, and he was not known to law enforcement. Down here.
I'm wondering if you could tell me whether you believe his to also be a homicide, and if you have a date of birth for him.
Yes, so I'm not going to stand up here and speculate on his cause of death at this time. We're going to wait to cooperate with the forensic pathologist before we say anything about that. I do have a date of birth for him. It is 3/9/1989. Like I said, we'll know more about his cause of death tomorrow.
Sergeant Anthony, can you talk about you all knocked on doors, you searched homes. Had you searched Mr. Taylor's home before law enforcement found him?
We had talked to Mr. Taylor. We had been inside his home. Absolutely, we had. Yes.
Was the body of Faye buried, or was it just like in a
I'm
commercial?
not going to comment on the condition of her body. I appreciate your question, but I feel like if I had, it'd be insensitive at this time. Right here, yes, ma'am.
You say there's a definitive link. Is it DNA?
What I'm telling you is that part of our that evidence in our investigation links these two. They are not. It's not Faye and then a totally separate case. They are linked.
But you can't tell us that.
I can't. I'm not going to give you the specific details on how. I don't want to. What I can ask you for is this. We want more information about Cody Taylor starting at 3:44 Monday afternoon up until the time that we announced that we had found his body.
The time for one more, and then these guys got to get
Can
back.
you tell us how the family has been so far? How are they holding up and everything?
You know, unfortunately, I personally have not talked to them, but what I can tell you is this, is that we have victim specialists with them. My heart breaks for that family. As a parent, how do you go through that? We have a preschool not too far from here, and kids are out there playing on the playground as we pulled in. And as officers, we stopped and waved and made sure those kids saw us and smiled. I couldn't begin to answer that. Thank you so much. We will continue pushing out information. Follow Cayce Public Safety's Facebook page. We will continue to get you this information as it becomes available and as our investigation allows. Thank you so much for being here.
With the media giving us more information on the disappearance and murder of 6-year-old Faye Swetlik. It is a heartbreaking story. The entire community across the Midlands, really across the nation, have been following this story since 3:45 on Monday afternoon when we first heard of Faye's disappearance, and unfortunately she was found dead yesterday. A couple of updates coming out of that press conference. At this point, we do have a name associated with the man that was found next to Faye, not far from her body when she was located yesterday. That man's name is Cody Scott Taylor. His residence is on Piccadilly Square, which according to law enforcement is not very far from where Faye lived. The media has been requesting 911 calls. We also learned just a couple of minutes ago that law enforcement will be releasing those calls to us. We've got a reporter on the scene, and so Jacob Reynolds has been following this over the last several days. He was in that press conference, and he's going to have a lot more for you. But just to touch on the surface of what we know right now, officers say that they followed behind trash trucks in that community before those trash cans were emptied. And when they were emptied at that address, 602 Piccadilly Square, the residence of Cody Scott Taylor, there was a critical piece of evidence within that trash can that led them to asking more questions and searching for more answers and eventually locating Faye's body. We learned in this press conference that the director, the Cayce Department of Public Safety Director, Byron Snellgrove, was actually the person who found Faye's body. And what we learned from the coroner, Margaret Fisher, is that Faye had not been there long. We're going to turn things over, continue our team coverage now, and check in with Jacob Reynolds. Jacob, what else do you know?
Well, Darcy, as you heard during that press conference, some major developments in the case of missing 6-year-old Faye Swetlik now being investigated as a homicide. They have released the name of the deceased man they talked about yesterday. That name is Cody Scott Taylor. He's a 30-year-old. He lived about 100 yards or so from Swetlik's house. They say he had no prior criminal history. They did find him in his residence, and they now believe these two bodies are connected. Like we said, Faye's case is being investigated as a homicide. Now, they have not released anything about what exactly happened or any potential criminal connection between these two. They're just saying the two bodies they now believe are connected. And going back to kind of how they found Faye, the way it was described by Cayce DPS just now was that they found a piece of evidence as investigators were going behind trash trucks, dumping out trash cans before they would be put on the truck. And they found a piece of evidence that for some reason, they didn't release what the piece of evidence was, but it was a piece of evidence that they say they knew immediately was linked to Faye. They were able to close in on that area and begin a new search when Director Snellgrove and other investigators found Faye's body. They said they had searched the area it was found already. They believe it was her body was recently placed there. Not exactly sure what, again, that piece of evidence was. He declined to go into specifics because they're waiting to see if by some chance someone else or other people were involved in the disappearance, so they don't want to release all those details in case it comes up later with potential other suspects or persons of interest. But at the moment, no arrests, no persons of interest, no suspects, nothing at this time that they could release to us. And going back to this male. We now know Cody Taylor resided at 602 Piccadilly Square. They once again said they had no criminal history for Mr. Taylor. He was not known to law enforcement. At one point in the press conference, I asked, because Cayce DPS has been telling us they were knocking on doors, searching homes, if they had had contact with Mr. Taylor, and they told us they had knocked on his door, spoken to him, and had already searched that home. So once again, still lots of questions we need to have answered, but major developments in this case today. The naming of that deceased male, some connections between these two cases now. They know these bodies are related to each other in some way. They haven't released what that is. They also told us that Mr. Taylor was not a friend or relative of the Swetliks. He just was a neighbor in this neighborhood, and we want to repeat, lived about 100 or 200 yards away from the house. And going back to where they found Faye Swetlik, they found her in the woods between her home and that Napa Auto Parts. That it's eerie. We had press briefings there on Monday night and all day Tuesday, and like law enforcement said before we could even ask, they said they had also searched that area, and they believe her body being placed there was more recent than obviously when those searches had occurred. You heard Sergeant Evan Antley get emotional at the end of this press conference when he was asked how the family was doing. He said, put yourself in a mother or father's position, and it's just unimaginable what has happened here. But I do want to make it clear, we do not know what connection is between these two bodies, but we do know there is some sort of connection. They're not releasing what that is at this time, but they now believe the bodies of Faye Swetlik and Cody Taylor are related in this case, and it was something that fell out of a trash can that investigators saw that linked back to that area. So we'll have to wait and see what exactly that connection is, Darcy.
Jacob, thank you so much. I do remember, and you tell me if you heard this as well as I did in the press conference, it sounded like Sergeant Antley said that there was something on the missing persons press release, the notification, that described Faye that may have been in the trash. That was that critical piece of evidence, and them looking further. Did you hear the same thing?
Yes, he was asked if they could give a description of that piece of evidence, and he declined to give any specifics or identify it, but he did say it was something that would have been on those missing persons posters, some either piece of information or something that they found that would have also been on those missing person posters that they knew. And his words, I believe the word he said was immediately, that there was a connection there. And then that's how they were able to really zone in on that location. And once again, just another tidbit from this press conference that was chilling was, as they were about to start, a very in-depth new search of that area, it sounded like Director Snellgrove and other investigators found Faye's body while they were about to start setting up a more detailed grid-by-grid search that they had been doing, Darcy.
Jacob Reynolds reporting for us live outside of the press conference. Jacob, thank you so much. We are going to continue our team coverage today with News 19's Jenna Krzina. As Jenna gets ready to talk to you, we do want to stress to you all that law enforcement says that there is absolutely no reason to believe that there is an active threat in that area. Jenna, what are you hearing from community members this afternoon?
Well, Darcy, some of the people that I've spoke with say they still can't believe nobody saw something at this point that we had heard from neighbors. But I want to set this scene for you really quick. I want to show you, this is the entrance to the community where Faye lived, went missing, and was found. Now, there's the entrance to the community down here. This building that you're about to see, this is that Napa Auto Parts area where there were press conferences and that we had some of those briefings at earlier in the week. Now, here's a wooded area. Now, this is the wooded area that's between the Napa Auto Parts and then the apartment building where they said Cody Taylor lived. Now, that's 602 Piccadilly Square where we are at right now. Now, you can see the crime tape that is up over here, and you can see the crime tape that is around the back porch area of 602, the apartment they say that Cody Taylor lived in, and that where they found him. And then, of course, here is the wooded area that they were describing where Faye was found. Now, while we were out here, we did speak to some neighbors, and like I said, some of them are just keeping their eyes more open, checking out things a little bit more than they used to. But again, we saw law enforcement in this area a little bit earlier, probably about an hour ago. We saw law enforcement agents checking out the wooded area here, the back porch. That seemed to be the main focus of what they were looking at. But here's some sound from some neighbors earlier today.
And it's really hard to believe that nobody has seen anything with that happening if she got off a school bus right here. I mean, I know where the buses normally stop at in here, so it's kind of really weird that nobody's seen anything. Somebody will open their eyes and maybe help the community out in here. This is a good neighborhood, but I guess this just proved another way that things can happen in an instance.
Now again, they were saying Cody Taylor, the body of the man that they found, was living in 602 Piccadilly Square right here, again, where the crime scene is taped off on that back porch you can see, and then it's also taped off over here in this wooded area right in between that apartment complex and the Napa Auto Parts area. Now, Faye's home was just up the street, right past these apartments, so she was very close by, but in the press conference we heard they were just neighbors. They were not family, they were not friends, just neighbors, so no immediate connection there between Cody and Faye, but we're still learning and waiting for investigators to tell us more about that. But I also want to point out further down this street is where that memorial is that community members have set up, leaving flowers, balloons, lighting candles, pictures of Faye just all morning long, and it started last night. There's also one over at her school, Springdale Elementary, and it's been a devastating week for the community here. But I'm going to send things back to you, Darcy.
Jenna Krasina reporting for us live. Jenna, thank you so much. At the heart of this story, we can never forget that a child lost her life. In addition to that, a community has lost a child that they cared about. Students will go to school on Monday if they didn't go today, and their classmate will not be there. It is a heartbreaking situation, not only for those of us in the media and for those of you at home who have been following this story very closely since Monday, but for law enforcement as well. If you're just joining us now for News 19, you may have missed the press conference. We're going to give you a little bit of that press conference to make sure that you're up to speed on the developments in this investigation.
As part of that search, we located a critical item of evidence related to our investigation of bringing Faye Swetlik home. Based on that discovery, we narrowed down an area that we felt as an investigative team that we needed to go back to and look for more evidence. Director Snellgrove and leaders were in the area planning another methodical search of that area. Even though we had been there multiple times, we were going back. During the early planning stages of that search, Director Byron Snellgrove with Cayce DPS located the body of Faye Marie Swetlik. What we can tell you is this: based on our investigation and based on the information, the preliminary information that we received from the coroner's office, we believe that Faye had not been in that location for a very long time at all. A short time later, just moments after locating Faye Marie Swetlik, we located a deceased male at 602 Piccadilly Square. Body that was just identified as Cody Taylor. Was our evidence and our investigation does link these two together. I can confirm that he was a neighbor, that he was not a relative, he was not a friend, he was merely a neighbor that lived in Churchill Heights.
Again, the investigation continues into the link between Faye's death and the suspect's death. And so we're going to continue to ask these questions. We're going to continue to look for justice for Faye. But we can't forget about the fact that our very young viewers may be having some questions for you. How do you talk to your kids about this situation? What do you say to them when they tell you that they're afraid to play outside because of Faye? Our medical correspondent, Rosemary Belts, joins us now with more on how your family can mourn and deal with this tragedy.
The community is mourning Faye Swetlik. Many parents are shook up locally and nationally. People are concerned. Joining us is clinical social worker and therapist Jennifer Wolf. Jennifer, you have a very extensive background in trauma, behavioral health. You've worked over 30 years with families, children of all ages in the military. This is a very visceral experience for a lot of people in the community. What was your initial reaction when you learned about Faye's story?
Wow, Rosemary, my initial reaction was just tremendous sadness. Because I have walked with families through similar tragedies, I know that the impact of this is the inconsolable wound in the sense of it's something that's going to be managed, but you're not going to get over it. It's not something that can be fixed. You get through it and not over it. So I'm also a parent, and it's your greatest fear as a parent that something will happen to your child, and it doesn't matter what age they are, they're still your child. And so now the sadness is that this has now become a reality for this community and for particularly for this family. So just because I understand the impact, it's tremendous sadness. It's just it's trying to make sense out of senselessness, again, meaning out of meaninglessness. And it wasn't shock, it was just sadness for me.
And you brought up a really good point as the initial reactions of the sadness, parents, everybody affected. And I feel like it's important, with that being said, it's still fresh. The long-term effects that you brought up, it's about getting through a situation. What are some of the long-term effects that something like this could have on a family and on a community? And if we could talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, the long-term effects is that the impact is most likely going to be permanent, and that each family, each community is different, and will be impacted differently because of it. As I was thinking about what you just asked me, I have seen communities, though, in the midst of tragedy, rally with each other and do something positive to celebrate the life of this beautiful little girl. And helping the family do that, I frequently tell people, you can focus, everybody knows the tragedy, everybody knows it's horrific, but you can focus on that, or you can focus on the seeds that this little girl planted while she was here. And it is all of our jobs, her laughter, her smile, we see her, we know her, we feel her. Her playfulness, it is all of our jobs to carry that on because we're still on this walk here. So the impact will be permanent, but I think if you can rally with each other and do something positive, for an example, I'm working with a family now that lost their daughter, and they are doing an event with lanterns to memorialize their daughter. It's a year later, but allowing the community to grieve and doing something positive because her light, this little girl's light, is still there. She may have left this earth, but her light is still there, and we have to carry that on in her honor.
Again, our thoughts go out to the families through this difficult time. There's no words to say. We hope we can cover this story to the best of our ability. And just know that here, us at WLTX, we're with you. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've been here 60 years, and it's not a month that goes by that we don't have law enforcement.
Businesses in the area are helping law enforcement agencies as they continue the investigation of the death of 6-year-old Faye Swetlik. Restaurants like Zesto's in West Columbia have been helping provide meals during the week.
Most of it is chicken, boxes of chicken, our hamburger baskets. It's between chicken and hamburger baskets.
Gus Manus, the co-owner of Zesto's, believes it's important to help the community in times of need.
It was Tuesday where we donate 30 lunches for the law enforcement because of what they have to go through. And we're very sympathetic to the family of the little girl.
Zesto says they plan on and will be ready to provide more meals for law enforcement as the investigation continues. In West Columbia, Nick Jones, News 19, WLTX.
Nick, thank you so much. We're going to check back in with News 19's Jacob Reynolds as we continue our team coverage on the disappearance and murder of 6-year-old Faye Swetlik. Jacob, one of the things that came out of the press conference is that Sergeant Antley with the Cayce Department of Public Safety said that he would be releasing those 911 calls shortly for us. Have you gotten an update on when that will happen?
We have not. He said it would be in a few minutes, kind of right around that press conference. In the past, you'll remember they released the school bus video after one of these press conferences, and it took a minute to send all that out. As you can imagine, multiple media agencies all in this area trying to get that information, and so I'm sure it's taking a little bit of time for those emails to go out. They also were working on redacting and taking out the personal information they needed to take out of those 911 calls. It sounded like that process was done or almost done, so we should have those 911 calls in the next few minutes or few hours here on WLTX. And I just kind of want to take us back through that press conference. Forgive me if I look at my notes here a little bit, but first I want to start with the emotional impact this has had on law enforcement. You heard Sergeant Antley say at the beginning of this press conference that this had been, in his opinion, one of the toughest days for many law enforcement officers from this community. Just a terrible discovery yesterday to find the body of this 6-year-old. He started with that, saying, you know, they wanted the community to keep praying for Faye Swetlik. They wanted people to keep her in their thoughts, and law enforcement in your thoughts. As he said, this has been a very difficult time for all of them. And you heard at the end of that press conference, he got emotional talking about when he was asked how the family was doing, just putting himself in their shoes, he was overcome with emotion. And you know, there were also new details in this case in terms of what exactly happened. We now know Faye's body was found in the woods between her home and the Napa Auto Parts. And I had said earlier, we were doing press briefings in that Napa Auto Parts parking lot through Monday and Tuesday. Law enforcement kind of spoke to that. They said they had searched that area, and they believed Faye's body was put there very recently before it was found. And it actually sounds like, from what you just heard, what we just played, and listening to the press conference here in person, that it was Director Snellgrove and investigators trying to set up a more serious search and grid search of that area that came across her body. And then a few moments later, they found the body of Cody Taylor in his house, or at the residence, I should say. They found that body. They now believe those two cases are linked. They have not released what that link was, and it sounds like it was an evidence break in the case that led to this. Investigators were going behind trash cans before they were going to get picked up that morning, dumping them out before these companies could take them so they could look through the contents, and there was some piece of evidence that they found from a trash can that linked back to Faye. They knew to zone in on that area to search. And then, as you heard, Director Snellgrove, once again, it sounds like, made the discovery of 6-year-old Faye Swetlik. Now, I know a lot of people will be asking, what was that piece of evidence? Law enforcement not releasing it at this time. They did give some clues, saying you would have been able to tell what it was from the missing person posters. We're not exactly sure what that means, and I am not here to speculate, so I'm not going to do that. But because of that piece of evidence, they were able to zone in on that area, and as we've said, they were starting to look at organizing a very, grid by grid search of that area, and that's when her body was found in those woods between her home and the Napa Auto Parts. And let's take you through what we know about Cody Taylor. Cody Taylor, a 30-year-old, is the deceased male. Law enforcement found just a few moments after finding Faye's body. They have no criminal history for him. He was not known to law enforcement. They described him as a neighbor of the Swetliks. He was not a relative or, to their knowledge, a friend of the family. He lived a few hundred yards away. At this time, like we said, these cases are linked. They are not releasing how they're linked. A few other notes from this press conference. They're saying there is no reason for the community to feel like they are in danger. They have no suspects at this time, no persons of interest to report, and no arrests that they've made at this time. So there are still multiple questions we have. It sounds like autopsies on these bodies will be performed this weekend. We know Faye's will be in Charleston. It sounded like from the press conference today that Cody Taylor's would be in the same place or potentially at the same facility. We're not sure, but 30-year-old Cody Taylor, we now know that other body found, that deceased male, 30 years old, not known to law enforcement, but these cases are linked. And Darcy, the main takeaway from today was, one, yes, that information, that breaking news information, and then also, besides the breaking news, the heartbreak. Law enforcement, it sounds like, having a tough time, from what Sergeant Antley said. For many of them, he was calling it the toughest day of their career yesterday, having to, one, make that discovery, and then, informing families. Sergeant Antley got emotional talking about the family and putting himself in their shoes as a father, as a mother. So just a tough day, but still questions to ask. He said this case still being investigated with all of their attention, and we will have to wait and see how these bodies and the discovery of these bodies are linked, Darcy.
Jacob Reynolds, we appreciate it, and obviously it was the hard work of law enforcement that led to the discovery of Faye's body yesterday. And even though she's been found, the investigation is not over. They're still asking for your help. If you saw anything, if you think you saw anything, the tip line for Faye Swetlik is still open. We were searching for her. The search started on Monday afternoon. Unfortunately, Faye was not found in the way that any of us were hoping. But now we're in the process of searching for justice for this little girl and for her family. And law enforcement needs your help in that. The tips that you've given them have been very helpful. They've stressed that to the media several times. So if you saw anything, if you think you saw anything, if you have security camera surveillance of that area, if you have a Ring doorbell camera, please call 803-205-4444. That number is dedicated solely to tips for 6-year-old Faye Swetlik. We're going to wrap up this breaking news coverage, but we'll have more information for you when you join us today for Friends at 5.